I get to this, though, I want to talk to you a little bit about what cold case investigation is, what crime investigation is, why we do it, who does it, and how do we ever get to a point where 62 years later you could be having a conversation like this. I would be remiss if I did not take this opportunity. Very first, I wanted to thank all of the members of the Yavapai County Sheriff's Office, all the volunteers who never given up on this case. I mean from day one, 1960. Without their efforts, without their belief that someday, somehow this case could be solved, we wouldn't be sitting here today. The investigation of death, the prosecution of the most violent people in our society, people that would do harm to the most vulnerable people in our society, those most vulnerable amongst us, that is one of the main charges of law enforcement. That is the mission, to find out what happened and bring people to accountability, to bring offenders to accountability. No matter how long that takes, people need to know. If we're going to have deterrence of violent crime in this country, people have to believe that law enforcement will never stop looking for you if you commit these crimes. And that's an example of what's going on here today. So, anybody who's ever worked, investigated violent crimes, investigated victim crimes, you know, particularly homicide, you know that when you start these cases, you are filled with hope. You're looking for evidence. You're trying to solve it quickly. You're trying to find your perpetrators quickly. But as time goes on, that hope starts to dissipate. That belief that somehow, someday, you're going to get to the point where you solve this crime, that starts to dissipate. And a little bit of my own personal experience, a little bit of despair starts to set in. We've had conversations about, here in this room today, about cases that are out there still pending. But what do you do about that? In 1960, people had no idea that DNA would even be a technology. They wouldn't even know what to call it. It didn't exist. But somehow, some way, they did enough investigation to preserve, to document, to memorialize all the things that needed to occur so that someday we could get to this point. And that's where we're at today. And as you're thinking about in the future what is possible, you always have to not speculate and just do the things that you need to do the things that you know you need to do in collection and preservation of evidence, sticking with your investigation, sticking with everything that it's a very complicated process, and you know, it even gets me a little emotional to think that someday we're going to have some success doing some of these things. Our cold case volunteers, though, never gave up. This is their 5th solved case, for those of you who don't know that. They've got a couple more pending. They never gave up, and they came to me one day and they said, hey, guess what? We solved the little Miss Nogi case. And this is what they told me. Sharon Lee Gallegos was abducted on July 21st, 1960, while playing with 2 other children in an alley behind her grandmother's house in Alamogordo, New Mexico. And I'm going to invite Lieutenant Tom Bowles to come up and tell her story.
Thank you, Sheriff, and thank you, everybody, for coming. We are very excited about this. I'm very proud of the people that I work with, most of whom volunteer their time. They come and help us do this, and we wouldn't be able to do it without them. And most of this side of the room is those folks. So if you get a chance after this to meet them. But we got a phone call. Well, let me back up. We first became aware of Sharon's case around 2014. We had a volunteer, one of our original volunteer cold case investigators, had gone to a conference, met another cold case investigator volunteer from Colorado who asked him about Little Miss Nobody. And we didn't, all of our records now from 1993 are electronic or digital, but this case from 1960 was not digitized, was not electronic. So we had to do some digging to find out more about her. We found out she was buried in 1960 at the cemetery over by the hospital there, YRMC. And we were trying to figure out what to do with it. At that time, it was almost 60-year-old cold case. Not a whole lot of information we could find. And so Brendan ended up working with John Shannon, who's here today. John Shannon is one of our volunteers who we put in charge of our NamUS project. And we were, we believe we're one of the first agencies in the country to have all of our cold cases that we're aware of, either missing persons or found unidentified persons, into the NamUS database, and that's helped us a great deal. Through that, we had contact with NCMEC, National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, and in 2015, they offered to fund the exhumation of Little Miss Nobody and fund the DNA extraction and testing. That was done in November of 2015. Unfortunately, DNA science at that time, as advanced as it wasn't advanced enough to give us an identity. And about 3 weeks ago, we got a call from David Middleton with Othram Labs. They had reached out to us about 4 or 5 months before that and said that they would like to try and get her identified and try and help us with the case. They offered to do so with crowdfunding. These things are very expensive. And so we ended up partnering with them and doing that. And we got that phone call about 3 weeks ago, maybe 4 weeks ago now, saying that they were 100% certain that Little Miss Nobody was Sharon Lee Gallegos. How we got to that point was over the years, with the help of NCMEC and NamUS and some other agencies around the country and even some overseas. We were able to find some relatives of Sharon Lee Gallegos who were still alive at the time, and they gave us their DNA. But even with that, subsequent attempts up until about last 3 or 4 months weren't able to conclusively say that this was Sharon Lee Gallegos. Othram, because of the unique DNA testing they do, they were able to say that yes, this is Sharon Lee Gallegos, and Mr. Middleton will be up in a little bit to explain more about their process to you. But Sharon was abducted on July 21st of 1960, playing behind her grandmother's house in Alamogordo, New Mexico. Somebody who was out looking for rocks, was a gentleman out of Las Vegas, was out looking for rocks around Highway 93, the Congress area, Alamo Lake Road, and came across her partially buried body. Called in, our deputies and detectives went out, they recovered her, they tried to identify her. Of course, this is 1960, medical science has advanced quite a bit since then, but originally she was thought to be a 7-year-old girl, and because of the state of decomposition, that was the best estimate that they could get. Authorities from Alamogordo reached out to Yavapai County at some point, we believe in August, and in August said, hey, we had an abduction. We think that your found little girl might be our kidnapped little girl. But because of the age difference in the estimation, our estimated age was 7 years old. Sharon was 4 years old when she was taken. She was about to turn 5. That was one reason that they thought that this might not be her. The clothing description was different. And ultimately, there was a footprint comparison made by the FBI back in 1960 that said that the two were not the same. Footprint comparisons are not obviously how we do things now, but that was probably the best technology they had available to them at the time. So our detectives looked at the possibility of this being Sharon Lee Gallegos, but then ultimately ruled that out and moved on to other suspects and other leads. we had to piece a lot of what happened together from newspaper reports at the time. The FBI worked on this case, Alamogordo PD worked on this case, Yavapai County Sheriff's Office worked on this case, but unfortunately those reports are not around anymore. So a lot of it that we've been able to formulate, what happened to her is from old newspaper articles that we found on the internet. We still have work to do in this case. We would still like to identify the people who took her. We would still like to be able to answer the questions, what happened in those 10 days from the time she was taken to the time she was found. So we are still working. We have Detective Scott Perry here today. Detective Perry and our volunteer investigator, Deborah West, have been hard at work on that ever since we got this name. They continue to work on that. And we're hoping that maybe somebody today might see this and might have some information about that July 21st day in Alamogordo, New Mexico, what happened until we discovered her on July 31st of 1960. So I will turn it over to Kathy Clements from NIC.
We are honored to be here today to give this little girl her name back and to help this family who desperately wanted answers. Reached out looking to identify to assist with the exhumation of her remains in order to receive DNA samples to collect DNA samples. TMAP consultants regularly do these kinds of resource capabilities with law enforcement agencies. In the year 2016, we facilitated the forensic odontology exam to examine the child's teeth and help with a 3D facial reconstruction, which was done and by one of our forensic artists, and giving this little girl a face. The image was shared with the public with the hope that someone might remember her or give us answers or give law enforcement answers or questions to follow up on. Later that year, we received a tip from the public that she may in fact be the missing child, Sharon Gallegos. Law enforcement immediately set to work on that one. And though it took years, they never gave up. Through their tireless efforts in advanced DNA testing done by Othram Lab, who's here today, we finally found the name of that little girl, unidentified for 62 years. And Sharon's family finally has answers. We're grateful to everyone who had a role in this identification. No matter how much time has passed, we never stop searching for answers for any missing or unidentified child. Thank you.
Hi, my name is David Milton. I'm the CEO of Othram, and a couple things to mention. The first one, just to kind of contextualize what the sheriff had said about DNA not being the thing back when the sheriff was found. The structure of DNA, that double helix that everyone knows and loves, that was discovered in 1953. So it had not even been 10 years since people knew there was DNA, what that DNA looked like. Watson and Crick had first drawn a picture of what the structure was. It would be decades before it was ever used in anything even remotely related to forensics. So I think that's just a really interesting way to kind of position this case within history. I have a couple of things that I want to bring up. One, again, amplifying the comments that so many people cared about this case. One of the things that we do at Othram, and I'll tell you about Othram in a minute, is we work a lot of projects for which there's either not suitable funding or perhaps funding has been exhausted, because these investigations take decades and they're expensive. And so we have a resource, DNASolves.com, And we use that site to advocate for this kind of technology, to see the great things it can do, and to basically engage the crowd. And I just want to thank everyone because it was an investment of capital made by the Yavapai Sheriff's Office. We needed additional support, and we were able to crowdfund the remaining funds necessary for this case in just 24 hours. It's quite amazing. And so I just want to point that out. I feel like that's what the internet was made for originally. It was made to bring people together and to go take on these huge projects that you otherwise could not take on as small groups. I think this is a wonderful example, and we hope to work lots more cases in the future this way. The other thing I want to point out is that science is always changing, and so you know, if there's DNA, if there's any evidence at all, from my perspective, the case is not cold. The case is just waiting for the right technology and the right tools to access it. And you know, we have a team of about 30 people at Othram. We've spent you know, decades, most of us, myself 25 years, doing nothing but playing with DNA. And so learning how to access it, how to read it, how to get information from it, and how to work with DNA that can sometimes come from very challenging sources, such as, you know, a case that is more than 60 years old. And it's all we've ever done. And we started Othram in 2018 with the mission to basically build the best-in-class tools. Instead of using a tool that's used for something else, and we'll try here as well, we wanted to build something that is specifically for forensic cases. We wanted to leave no case behind. We wanted to make sure we could systematically go and clear all the cases in NamUS and all the other places that are cataloging you know, cases that have been unsolved. And we're very grateful and excited partners of the NamUS program and hope to work many more cases through as well. And so I just want to point out that there is a difference, and you can see that here, between using just any tools that are available versus using something that's purpose-built. We have the only laboratory in the country that does this work in-house. It's all we do. We don't do any research. We don't do any consumer work. We exclusively focus on this one problem of how to extract information that can help law enforcement identify suspects, or in this case, victims from crime scenes. And so I'll leave it at that, but just to say that it does make a difference, the tools that you're using. Not all tools are the same. You have to use best-in-class tools, or you can take an investigation sometimes in a longer path than it should be, and sometimes it won't get solved at all. And then I also want to then again amplify that community support drives not just the investigative process, but all the aspects of it. And none of the work that we have done would have been possible without the huge number of folks that have helped. And that includes the local media that played a huge role in getting the case out there in our involvement so that we could get the resources we needed to complete it. So I appreciate it.
Ladies and gentlemen, as I said, after we have one more speaker that I'll call up in a second, we will have Sheriff Rhodes conclude. And after that, we'll be available, everyone up here will be available for questions for you. But we do have a very nice surprise, which is a surprise to us. But we happen to have here Sharon's nephew. His name is Ray Chavez. He came all the way here specifically to be here for this announcement. He knows how important it is. He's representing his family. And he has very graciously agreed to make some comments and be here for some questions. So Ray, if you'd like to come up, please.
Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak. Again, my name is Ray Chavez, representing my aunt's family. That was my mother's sister. I wasn't even born when she was taken. She was taken in 1960. I was born in 1965. But it's something that our family grew up with, this story. In Alamogordo, we were known as that family who had the little girl kidnapped, our aunt. And we revisited it many times during our life. We would have sheriff departments call us up and say they're looking into the case. It was very comforting to know that people were still looking and she wasn't forgotten. I even did a research paper when I was in high school about my aunt going missing. And unfortunately, my mom and my grandmother aren't here anymore. My mother, Ramona Chavez, and my grandmother, Lupe Gallegos. passed away, but being Ramona's oldest son, I wanted to be here to thank everybody. Thank the Sheriff's Office for relentlessly not giving this up. The Kathy's and Othram, it's amazing the work that you did to be able to, for our family to be at peace. The cold case detectives that worked on it, I got to meet them earlier today. That was amazing that they continued. Officer Perry, he was the one who, Detective Perry, he was the one who reached out to my sister 2 weeks ago. And so my sister called me right away and said, hey, somebody called again. And we said, okay, we'll see where it goes. And then a couple of days ago, they called again and said, oh, we would like to have a Zoom call. And we were like, wow, maybe this is going someplace else. And Friday on that Zoom call, they did tell us the results. We were really overjoyed. We looked into Little Miss Nobody and were amazed at how the people of Prescott and Yavapai County really rallied around her, took care of her for 62 years. And we, as the family, want to say thank you. Thank you for what you've done for us. Thank you for keeping my aunt safe and never forgetting her. It's still sinking in. I was talking to Kathy earlier, and I think our family's going to need some resources to kind of deal with this. And we, like I said, we grew up hearing many stories. So all I wanted to be here is to say thank you, and we appreciate everything you've done for us. Thank you very much. Let's give them a
We'll open it up to some questions. If you have any, I'll ask the person you're needing for an answer from to come up here. So does anyone want to start at a question? Is it all still sinking in like it was to us as well?
Right here. Yes. What comes next in this investigation? Is this part of the mystery solved? But when it comes to the person who did this, what comes next?
Thank you very much. As I said earlier, there's a lot of work still yet to be done. We very much, this is one step in the process. This is the first step. We very much want to be able to tell the family and everybody else what happened in those intervening 10 days. And so there are some details that, this isn't the appropriate place to share those, nor the appropriate time. But there are some details that we are looking to, find out if we can identify those people who were in the car. If you read the newspaper accounts from Alamogordo back in that time, there were two kids out playing with Sharon at the time. One, it turns out, was her cousin, who was about 6 months older than her. She was 5 years old at the time. There was also an 11-year-old there. They identified a 1951 or a 1952 Plymouth or Dodge sedan, dark green. One of the two children told somebody, and it ended up in a newspaper article, that there were two kids in the car when the car pulled up, and one of those kids was a freckle-faced little boy. So we would very much like to be able to identify that kid. There are a lot of stories, and Ray gave us some more information today that we were unaware of, that a woman was in town for about 4 or 5 days before July 21st. There was one account that this woman, after church on Sunday, about 5 days before Sharon was kidnapped, this woman stayed after church and was asking people around the church about Lupe and about Sharon. Another witness told law enforcement, and it worked its way to the newspaper, a day or two before the kidnapping, that this same woman mentioned the same description, showed up at the neighbor's house asking about Lupe and asking about Sharon and wanted to give Lupe a job. And then we get to the afternoon of July 21st, when the car pulls up, those two kids, the two kids that I mentioned earlier, the 5-year-old and the 11-year-old, said that the dark green car pulled up. It was driven by a pale white man. One account says he had a mustache, brown hair. That the woman then approached Sharon and said, you know, if you come with us, we'll buy you new clothes and we'll get you some candy. She said she didn't want to go. The woman then got out of the car, grabbed Sharon by the elbow and pulled her into the car. Law enforcement, Alamogordo, then, you know, snapped into action, set up roadblocks. Unfortunately, they didn't locate her. So we very much want to be able to answer that question. How did they get out of Alamogordo, and how did they get to Alamo Lake Road? You can see on the map on one of these two, it's about a quarter mile off of Highway 93 on Alamo Lake Road is where she was found. We would very much like to be able to answer that question, and that's what Detective Perry and Jeff West and the other volunteer investigators are going to help with. Yes, ma'am.
Was there any DNA found on her body that was preserved that wasn't her DNA?
Unfortunately, like I talked about, and like Mr. Middleton talked about, science has advanced a great deal in the last 62 years. Unfortunately, back in 1960, we didn't really understand how to store evidence. And like we covered, like the sheriff covered, detectives back then had no idea that DNA was on the horizon at any point. So the evidence from this case was stored in a vault at the courthouse downtown, where the sheriff's office used to be before I got there, a long time before I got there. And that was kept in a vault. The problem with the vault is there's no air moving through there, and it's dark, and it's conducive to mold.
Hey guys, sorry about that. We had technical difficulties. I hope the actual story stays up and you guys heard the story. They found out who Little Miss Nobody is. And as you guys were probably listening, there was an actual story that needed to be told, and one of the descendants showed up. So hopefully you guys got that. We'll try to get a press release out later on today so you guys can go ahead and read all about it. But make sure you go right here, theprescotttimes.com. And once again, so sorry for that interruption. We hope that you guys got the gist of it. And yeah, thank you for watching. We'll see you guys later.